Trails through Daybreak, being the start of a new saga in what was at the time a nearly 20-year run of the Trails franchise, spanning 11 entries and 3 completed arcs, needed a new foundation at this point in the series. Following the completion of the Trails of Cold Steel arc and the conclusion of the first saga of the series along with it, the series was at a narrative turning point to where Nihon Falcom could reboot the series to bring in a new audience by starting completely fresh and pioneering a new direction for the franchise, loosening itself of nearly 20 years of narrative build-up. Trails Through Daybreak takes practically every single criticism of the Trails franchise and JRPGs as a genre and figuratively and literally built a new republic on it, and in my opinion easily becomes one of the best games in the franchise through doing so. Daybreak, which I'll be referring to as Kuro no Kiseki from this point, is by far the most thematically focused and coherent game in the Trails franchise, and it absolutely nails everything the writers wanted to convey. This game's themes are fully explored from the ground up through every single character, NPC, dialogue, location, and chapter, and with good reason. The foundation of Kuro's narrative is more grounded and rooted in reality than anything that's come before it, and it can all be seen all throughout the writing of this game. In other words, they locked in. The majority of this video will assume you have no idea what the Trails franchise is. I'll mainly be doing a review and some light analysis for my Kuro 1 and 2 videos, and save the heavy analysis for the end of the Calvert arc. I hope it encourages you to play the game for yourself, and if you want a guide on getting into the Trails series or just want to watch some videos on the music of the series, I have multiple videos you can watch on that as well. Thank y'all for being patient with me while I played through this game and wrote up the script. I know it took a really long time, but I hope you enjoy the new direction I take with this and Kuro 2's video as well. In order to bring in newer audiences to the Trails franchise, Kuro makes some major but incredible changes to the core gameplay loop. The option to play through most of the game with real-time action combat has been added to the game in order to streamline the combat a little bit more. You could say it's something similar to Falcom's other big franchise East, but not as fleshed out. This addition makes navigating dungeons in the overworld much more fluid in order to get the player directly into the heart of the game. Outside of boss battles which require you to play traditional turn-based combat, the player has the option to swap between real-time combat and traditional turn-based combat at will, which allows you to fully customize how you want to play and the amount of depth you want to invest into combat. Since I mainly played these games for the story, what I did was set the difficulty of real-time combat to very easy and the command-based combat to normal, which allowed me to completely negate grinding while still giving me a challenge during the boss fights, which are still actually pretty difficult. This time around with the combat system, there's much more depth in the command-based combat as the old Orbit or Materius system back in the Trails in the Sky games. If you enjoy creating really flexible and unique builds and finding party synergy, this game has brought that back to the series. There's a wide variety of mechanics and characters to experiment with when building up your party, but you don't have to engage with it if you don't want to thanks to these difficulty and customization options. Not only is the gameplay of Kuro completely different in order to cater to a new audience, the writing and the party dynamics have also had a soft reboot for the new audiences as well. The writers assume that this is the player's first Trails game from this point on, and they do a great job of letting the game serve as an entry point to the series while also maintaining the momentum of its previous saga. The writers ensure that new players are introduced to the characters that have been in the franchise for years, while also adding new context to their past for veterans of the series, all while managing to avoid any major spoilers from the previous saga. To use a specific example without spoiling anything, veterans know that Ren plays an active and vital role in pretty much every game in the franchise, but she's still introduced as a new character with her own standalone arc within this story that's still appealing to new players that don't have the context. This keeps the writing engaging for all audiences, preventing the issue of alienating anyone who hasn't played any of the previous games. Characters new to this game's arc and from previous arcs in the story will vaguely reference past events in the franchise in order to give new players context as to who they are and what arc they're from in the story, which helps a bit with giving context to the world building. Thematically and narratively, Kuro shifts the writing and tone of the story to appeal to its aging target demographic and the ever-changing world that they live in now. If the previous arc in the franchise, Trails of Cold Steel's development, is a direct reflection and response to the trends and culture of gaming and anime throughout the 2010s, Kuro would be a direct love letter to the 2000s era and culture of anime. More specifically, Kuro's writing is more in the vein of anime such as Great Teacher Onizuka and especially Gintama. Like if you like Gintama, you will like this 100% because Kuro's entire framework took Gintama's homework and turned it in for a free 100, maybe even 110. Like, the protagonist, Vaughn Arkwright, is literally a carbon copy of Gintoki from his personality, his role in the universe, the way they tell his story, his love of sweets, his moral code. Literally a carbon copy. Even the party dynamic within Kuro's main cast is also pretty reminiscent of Gintama's main cast in the Oddjob crew. And even the pacing of the story feels as episodic and tonally paced as Gintama does. The writers effortlessly balance slice of life, humor, and serious story beats with its cast and narrative, and it's all the better for this tonal shift in my opinion as compared to Trails of Cold Steel. Adhering to the main thematic focus of the game, the cast of Kuro is diverse in age, background, personality, and values, which leads to a consistently great exploration of its characters and Calvert as a region. The protagonist Vaughn Arkwright is a 24-year-old for-hire mercenary who works between the surface and the underworld of Calvert, doing odd jobs that the police and bracers won't take. Throughout the narrative, he ends up unintentionally recruiting a schoolgirl, a child soldier, a hotshot theater performer, a maid, a movie star, and a young super genius. And each one of these characters hail from drastically different backgrounds, upbringing, and location as well. Their ages range from 13 to 15 to 17, 19, 20, and 69 years old. Nice. And in a landscape of JRPGs where the protagonists are all high schoolers around the same age, from the same town and the same general background, it's a breath of fresh air to play as a relatively older post-college protagonist leading such a diverse cast. I'm about the same age as Vaughn, and I haven't had a game where I've resonated with a protagonist to this extent in such a long time. Vaughn's daily life revolves around him just trying to operate his business and survive as an adult, dealing with his past and current relationships catching up with him. And similar to Gintoki from Gintama, we get to see glimpses of Vaughn's guarded past through the eyes of other characters that inhabit this world. And this is an approach to writing that I really love in video games. We don't really learn about Vaughn through explicit storytelling and being told this is Vaughn's character. We learn about Vaughn through other characters and NPCs that you can interact with. As you play through the game more and start to interact with more NPCs and learn about Vaughn through them, you get to see just how integral Vaughn is to the community, which is incredible, honestly. More games should take this approach to writing. Another relatable thing that I love about Vaughn's writing is that he's constantly being reminded that he's ancient by 20 and 19 and 18 year olds, despite only being a few years older than them, which is something I'm constantly dealing with now, and I resonated with that so much as someone who just entered that mid-20s age. Navigating your mid-20s is a very interesting phase, and it's great to see this fully explored within the genre again, similar to what Yakuza 7 did for 4-year-olds that grew up with JRPGs themselves too. The writing quality for character banter is also consistently great throughout the entirety of this game as well. Slimming down the size of the cast enables the writers to let the characters develop their own interpersonal relationships within the party, as well as the NPCs in the overworld. These characters feel like they have their own lives outside of the party, which I personally love in JRPGs. This way you don't end up with the notorious JRPG problem of having party members that only interact with the party when they're at the forefront of the chapter. There wasn't a single time in this game where I felt like one of the main party members was put on the back burner in favor of the other. Every single party member is written in the story really evenly. And this cast feels like a cohesive group navigating a living, breathing world from beginning to end. With such a diverse and vocal party, there's room for characters to consistently express their individual concerns, perspective, and especially their humor. This game's dialogue is genuinely hilarious, especially if you keep Aaron in the party. That dude has no filter whatsoever. They were definitely teetering on an M rating with 90% of what he says, and I'm not even exaggerating. The romantic bonding events found in the previous games in the series have been shifted to favor more platonic connection events, which allow for more character development than ever before. Because the protagonist's love interest isn't ambiguous or even the focus of the story, we can now have more character development, which is great. This shift also allows bonding events to serve as opportunities for the writers to develop the world building of Zemuria as well, which is an added bonus. The in-game short stories that have been a staple collectible in every single Trails game has been replaced in Kuro with a handful of films in order to adhere to Calvert's technological advancement. I personally didn't know how to feel about this at first, because I've always loved reading these short stories in previous games, so much so that I've literally printed them out to go back and read them from time to time. They've served as pretty major avenues for the writers to develop the lore and world building for future titles of the series, so for them to be replaced with what's essentially a few paragraphs and images felt kind of sacrilege at first. I got over that pretty quickly though, once I actually realized that this allowed for the writers to develop their characters and the world of Zemuria even further than they've already made room for with this game. These films range from a multitude of genres, from romance, thrillers, children's films, historical pieces, to even straight up propaganda and an X-rated version of one of the films, which is hilarious. And throughout the story, you can invite any party member and a few key NPCs to go to the movies with you, and afterward, they'll comment on how they personally reflected on the film, which allows for so much character development and so much world building that would feel out of place to explore otherwise. For example, if you take your entire party to see the romance film, they'll each go in depth about which perspective of the relationship they resonated with, which allows you to get a glimpse into their maturity level and even their past relationships or lack thereof. If you take them to the historical film, for example, you get to see their character's perspective on Calvert's history and relationships to their own background or identity, And I genuinely think this is genius because with such a diverse cast from different backgrounds, you can get so many different perspectives on how Calvert is perceived, especially since this series is known for propaganda as our own world is. Just to give more examples, you have a party member that's 13 years old, as I said, and if you take her to the movies, she's gonna believe everything that she sees pretty literally. But if you take one of the older party members, they're gonna have their own very nuanced opinion on what they're seeing, especially when you take them to a documentary or maybe the romance film. There's such a wide range of world building and character building here that's all done at the same time that I absolutely love, and I hope we get more of this in the future. I spent so much time going through all of this dialogue, and it was one of the more memorable parts of the entire game for me. I said all this basically just to say that I personally think that Kuro's writing is easily some of the best in the franchise on every single level, and it's not even a contest. And I hope that anyone who considers picking this game up, or already has picked this game up, truly appreciates the length that the writers went through to connect the audiences both old and new for this game. Kuro takes place in the highly anticipated region of the Republic of Calvard, which has been consistently built up in the series since the original Trails in the Sky back in 2004. If you're a One Piece fan, the setup and payoff of this arc is adjacent to making it to the Wano or Elbaf arcs in that story. Calvard as a region has been set up throughout the franchise as a place of diversity in terms of their demographics and culture, which is a foundational thematic focus throughout the entirety of this game, and I'm assuming this arc that'll consistently being referred to throughout the video. The setting of Calvard fuses the political history, diaspora, and demographics of post-World War France, and has a bit of the United States injected into it as well. This world-building decision leads to an interesting progression where the series is simultaneously experiencing sweeping changes in the political states, developing technologies, and demographics of their nation. And just like France in real life, Calvard historically had strained tensions with their neighbors and shifts from a monarchy to a republic. In-game, this arc is directly following the end of the Erebonian War fought throughout the Cold Steel arc, which is essentially an allegory for the rise and fall of Prussia's Bismarck Empire. Within this context, at the start of this game, Calvard, or allegorically France, is experiencing a new wave of Eastern immigration and relative peace due to the reparations gained from the Erebonian War. But, as with all major societal changes, this era of peace creates internal and external tensions between immigrants, natives, and also the colonizers within Calvard, and the game is not afraid of talking about this. One of the foundational thematic focuses of Kuro is the gray area of society, somewhere in between the light and dark of the world of Sumeria. In the previous games in the franchise, we play as the law of the world through the Bracer Guild, the Crossbow Police Force, and a military academy. This, aside from Trails the Third, which is the best Trails game, is the first time in the series that had a protagonist who operates outside of that good alignment. Mechanically, the game also allows the player to shape their alignment throughout the game's main story and side quests, which allows you to align your characters with organizations of your choice. You can side with the Bracers if you want to be aligned with the law, the villains of the franchise Ouroboros if you want to be aligned with chaos, and a new organization if you want to organize between the two. These choices are actually pretty consequential within the world in the grand scheme of things, and the NPCs will change their dialogue and align with you depending on your choices. Thematically, the narrative explores how gray areas in society are created, shaped, and maintained in the multitude of ways that it impacts all parties involved. Every single character, location, and plot point is a different perspective in the exploration of the margin between the majority and the minority, which is something that I absolutely love as a thematic focus, and I'll explore more in depth here in a second. This narrative exploration of the gray areas of society, in combination with Calvard ushering in a new era of peace, makes room for an interesting and bold exploration of a number of hard-hitting themes that most writers will shy away from in mainstream video games. And this is something I absolutely want to talk about without spoilers, of course. The main thematic focus that I want to absolutely highlight here that's seen all throughout Kuro no Kiseki is how the diaspora, and by extension diversity, prejudice, and racism shapes the landscape of our modern societies. It's rare to see media that covers these issues with tact, let alone with more than a surface level understanding of the concept of racism, which is why I'm so glad that the writers and localizers went all in on building the Calvard arc on this foundation. Many fantasy stories tend to tackle the concept and topic of racism by making it synonymous with the surface level take on slavery when it's so much more prevalent than that, especially within our modern society. For example, Final Fantasy XVI doesn't go much further with its allegory of racism than saying, these people were oppressed because they have powers, which is so harmful within that conversation. So many people, especially in America, have been educated to consider the concept of racism and slavery synonymous. This makes the systems that uphold racism almost invisible and taboo to even talk about, because many people think that we can and should just move on from talking about it, just because people aren't literally enslaved in chains now. When in reality, racism is a concept that is ever present in the way that our society is shaped and is currently maintained. It rules over every single facet of the lives of people of color, and I want to take the time to use Kuro as a way to educate people on it. Kuro approaches and explores the system of racism with a more modern lens, and you can tell that the writers understand the difference between systemic racism and prejudice, which is already a huge step forward when talking about this concept. Using the book So You Want to Talk About Race as a reference, it defines racism as a prejudice against someone based on race when those prejudices are reinforced by systems of power specifically. In the case of Kuro, the game explores how, despite Calvert legally banning discrimination based on race, immigrants from Zemuria's Tharbad and the East regions, which are essentially the Middle East and Asia, are still constantly being impacted by systemic racism and prejudice within Calvert's system. Many of the immigrant NPCs throughout the game explore the different ways that the corrupt systems and prejudice of Calvert's community are failing them, and we can see this from xenophobia to racism. For example, some of the hostesses and actresses from Tharbad can't find jobs because they're being discriminated against for their ethnicity. Older Calvarians don't like the widespread immigration and want to go back to Calvert's monarchy days, which sounds very familiar. And we can see the ways that younger Calvert citizens are either being indoctrinated or fighting against this system as well too. This is something that I've almost never seen in mainstream video games, let alone media, outside of maybe Disco Elysium, which is inherently overtly political. Topics like this almost always get censored out in fear of upsetting the no politics in games crowd, which doesn't really make sense, especially for this series. Like, this series is literally directly based off of history. But overall, it's explorations like this that make me appreciate how dedicated the writers were in making Calvert feel alive. This is the part of the video where I'm getting into the analysis of the stories, in particular the characters of Kuro. If you haven't played Kuro, I highly recommend picking it up and playing through it yourself, and maybe even going through the rest of the series. Feel free to come back and let me know if you do so in a comment. I'd love to hear about your thoughts on the franchise. With that being said, there will be spoilers for specifically Kuro no Kiseki and no other game in the series from this point, so if you haven't played Kuro, do it, come back, let me know. Gray areas in society are created when there's friction between what's considered lawful and unlawful, and it's important to understand that what's defined as lawful and unlawful is determined by those in power. Just because something is in law doesn't mean that it's inherently correct or even moral. Many laws in place today, especially in the United States, are created in order to keep specific groups of people in power and keep other groups down. Sometimes these gray areas come to fruition due to people not fully acknowledging these parts of society. For example, homelessness, abuse, and racism. And Calvert as a region is experiencing the full embodiment of this gray area. They're a relatively progressive region on the surface that's currently experiencing a lot of friction and moving from its darker history into a brighter future. While they're the most technologically advanced and progressive region in Zemuria, they're overriding a lot of their historical infrastructure by rapidly developing it. While immigration is at an all-time high, it's causing internal conflict and turmoil between its own population. There's so many examples of how this transition from the past into a new future creates gray areas in society, and it's fully explored throughout the main cast of its playable characters. Each party member in Kuro embodies another theme explored throughout the story, which is running from the past and not acknowledging one's past or identity, and existing within a gray area of duality because of it. I'll go through each party member and explain how they adhere to this theme. The protagonist Vaughn Arkwright is constantly haunted by his history, his relationships, and his past mistakes, and keeps himself close but distant as a result from it because of it. He has to live up to the mistakes he's made in the past, as well as the expectations from his master that trained him. This is even shown in the way that he fights. His weapon is similar to Estelle and Lloyd's in that it's primarily made for defense, but he can also sharpen it enough to kill somebody. His personal fighting style is also a full reflection of this duality, as it's a mix of Eastern and Western combat. He's literally stuck in between the gray area of multiple aspects of his life. And obviously, Arkwright Solutions is literally a gray area of society to where they're willing to take on any job for any motivation. Agnes has to live under the shadow of her family's reputation while knowing the implications of following and upholding it. She has to balance being a part of Arkwright Solutions while also living a normal school life, and she's burdened by the weight of her family life and what comes with it, as well as the shift it took when her father became president. Fairy is a child soldier who is thrown into navigating life as a relatively normal citizen, as well as an immigrant who's not used to Calvert society. She's forced to live up to the legacy of everyone in Kruga and is forced to choose to live life as a normal girl or a Jaeger. Aaron is the reincarnation of the Tyrant, which forces him out of a normal life into being a pawn in the battle between multiple organizations throughout Calvert. He's forced into a position to where he has to be an intermediary for the East and the rest of Calvert. Rosette literally doesn't own her own body, as it's on loan on behalf of Marduk Corporation, who saved her life by giving her an artificial body. While she's grateful for this, she does struggle with her lived experience as a cyborg who's human but is mostly machine, a ghost in the shell issue. Even though Judith is one of the most popular actresses in Calvert, she lives in the shadow of her mother and grandmother, who are also successful actresses, and she has to live a double life. Throughout the game, Quattro slowly realizes his feelings about his identity and sexuality. He's coded as a bi and trans character, which is explored through the way he interacts with characters throughout the story. I thought his character was handled with tact throughout the game, and his development was one of my personal favorites. Brigard lives under the new identity in opposition to his role as a Dominion. Unlike the rest of the party, Brigard has lived long enough to be comfortable within his own identity. Rather than being tied to a religious organization with its own code, he lives life hedonistically while also staying true to his personal code, acting as a guide for Vaughn and the rest of the party to discover themselves. Once again, you can see just how committed the writers were to the thematic focus of this game through these characters alone. The underpinning of the theme allows for the characters to feel much more intimately connected to each other and their mutual goals. Overall, I do think that Chrono Kiseki is one of, if not the best games in the Trails franchise, and I do think that this is a great entry point for anyone who hasn't played this series as well too. I want to thank y'all for being patient for this video. I know it's been a very long time. I finished this game back in October. I got it in July when it came out. It's been a wild ride. Life has been busy. It's been great. But I do feel bad because my channel's been taking a back burner. But thank y'all for understanding. In terms of Kuro 2, I will say that I probably will end up starting it in the summertime. I definitely want to finish it before Kai comes out, but just to keep y'all in the loop, what I'll probably do is just make an entire Calvert arc analysis when the arc is over. So that might be a year from now, that might be 2 years from now. Whenever it happens, I'll try to do that. But other than that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out my other videos and have a good one. I'll see y'all next time.